38. "Hello, Dirge," Overham said, only mildly surprised. "Long time." The man named Dirge emerged from the shadows. He was wiry, but held a deadly grace that Gryph had seen in many men, a grace that not only suggested an ability for deadly violence, but a love of it. He was nearly a head shorter than both Gryph and Overham, with a shaggy mop of unkempt hair surrounding a dark-skinned face. Ice-blue eyes pierced the distance between them like a laser. A thin scar traced down his left cheek from jaw to cheekbone. As he eyeballed the tall Zaidai, the man known as Dirge traced the scar with an idle thumb, almost as if he wasn't aware he was doing it. Gryph saw Overham tense, and knew that the warrior monk had been the one to give Dirge the scar. Gryph got ready for action, as this encounter was unlikely to go any better than the last one.
"Been wondering these last few months if you were still alive?"
Dirge said, as he picked at his fingernails with a wickedly sharp dagger.
"But part of me knew you were still around. Part of me knew all I had to do was wait for the sign. I didn't know the sign would be such a little prick."
"No squeeze, Zeg, fat hairy thing."
A heavy man emerged from the shadows, his sausage fingers clasped around Zeg's thin neck. When Zeg saw them, it grinned. In anger or joy, Gryph couldn't tell.
"Stupid blue-haired midget. See what trouble gets Zeg into?"
"Of course," Wick grumbled, gripping his staff harder. "I bet you didn't even try to keep your mouth shut."
"Fat hands won't crush Zeg's neck. Zeg like neck just fine. No want crushed. Zeg tell thin, ugly Scarface what want no. Zeg's neck stay no crushed."
Gryph felt the tension rise as Zeg laid out insults without care of consequence. "We have somewhere we need to be," Overham said in a steady voice, his eyes never leaving Dirge's.
"At first, I wondered what would bring you back down here,"
Dirge said. Then his voice changed to a mockery of Zeg's.
"Pretty lady need save."
Dirge squeaked before the strain of the tone caused him to cough and clear his throat.
"Damn, how do you talk like that?"
Dirge said, glancing at Zeg.
"Sound nothing like Zeg."
Zeg pouted. Dirge chuckled to himself at the imp's irritation, but then brought his focus to Gryph.
"You are new to the neighborhood, aren't you? How are you liking the accommodations?"
Gryph said nothing.
"Oh, the strong, silent type. My favorite. What's your name, sugar?"
"Gryph, and I have no quarrel with you." Dirge walked up to Gryph, running a thin hand along Gryph's chest, and then down his arm and along his back. It was all Gryph could do not to flinch at the man's predatory attention. This Dirge was skilled in the art of psychological warfare. He was trying to make Gryph uncomfortable. After a moment, sensing that Gryph was no easy target, Dirge gave up on the tactic.
"You're the one who stirred up this hornet's nest, aren't you? The vermin and the dead have been all aflutter these last few days. That's when you arrived, isn't it? What makes you so interesting,
"Nothing. I've been here for weeks," Gryph said. "So, If you could point the way to the exit, I'll gladly get out of your hair." Dirge laughed, what seemed to be a genuine laugh.
"Amusing and attractive,"
Dirge said, taking Gryph's chin in his hand. Gryph did his best not to flinch and stared back into the man's eyes.
"But I do not think so. You're new to the Barrow. Your eyes don't have that sunken desperation the rest of ours do. You still think there's a way out, don't you?"
"There's always a way out," Gryph said. "You just have to do what is necessary to find it."
"You may be right, my tall friend. And just what will you do to find it?"
Gryph felt an odd twinge in his mind as Dirge stared at him. Without thinking, he cast Mind Shield. Dirge jumped as the shell snapped around Gryph's mind.
"Well, that was rude,"
Dirge said.
"but there are other ways of seeing truths."
Dirge studied Gryph's face, twirling his knife almost casually as he did. Gryph stared back with an unflinching gaze. He'd faced more skilled interrogators in his day. After a few moments, Dirge understood he would get nothing from Gryph, and chuckled slightly.
"I wouldn't trust this one, Ovi. He has the look of a man who will stop at nothing to achieve his goals, even if that means tossing you and wee Mohawk boy aside like last week's fling."
Wick glowered at the comment, even as Zeg chuckled at the insult. Dirge looked down at Wick.
"This one's yours, if I'm not mistaken."
Wick said nothing.
"A gnome thonic summoner. I'm sure that went over well with the family."
Wick tensed and gripped his staff tighter. Ovrim extended a hand to the gnome's shoulder, warning him with a calm grip. Dirge's hand whipped up to Ovrim's neck, and a small bead of blood pulsed from the Zidai's jugular. Gryph tensed, ready to move, but with a last motion, Ovrim warned Gryph off. A moment later, he collapsed to one knee, and then fell onto his side, muscles knotted in paralysis.
"That was a long time coming,"
Dirge said with a satisfied sigh. Gryph walked to his fallen friend and felt for a pulse. Ovrim's heart was beating at a normal rate, and the Zidai's eyes were alert. "What did you do to him?"
"A little gift,"
Dirge said, holding the index finger up. A thin needle protruded from a thimble-like apparatus on his right hand.
"He'll be fine in a few hours."
The rogue moved his hands with a flourish, and the thimble disappeared somewhere in the folds of his clothing. Dirge kneeled down and traced a line on Ovrim's face, as if willing a matching scar to appear on the monk's face.
"Did Ovi here tell you about me? We used to be the best of pals, thick as thieves, as the saying goes, which was proper because we are all of us thieves."
Dirge stood and spread his hands around his assembled men.
"We were brothers in blood. It broke my heart when I learned he no longer wanted to be buddies. I tried to talk some sense into him, but he wouldn't have any of it. Even left me with a parting gift."
Dirge rubbed the scar on his cheek with the thumb of his right hand. "I'm afraid he didn't mention you," Gryph said, causing the wiry man to pause. Dirge did a good job of hiding his irritation, but Gryph saw it still. Dirge smiled and turned away.
No? Too bad. We had some good times, Ovi and I. But enough reminiscing about old times. What can I do for you, my new strapping friend?
I want an alliance. Gryph noticed that several of the men lurking around the cavern were eyeballing Ovrim in a way that suggested they didn't quite approve of Dirge or his methods. With the Grey Company.
Interesting. To what end?
I already told you. I am leaving the Barrow. Dirge laughed again.
I think he just insulted us, boys. Apparently, without the great and wonderful Gryph, we're too weak and stupid to figure a way out. Now that he's here, things will be just grand. Soon, we'll be having garden parties and singing songs and frolicking through the trees.
Forced laughter spread through the assembled men, and Gryph knew that every one of them pictured that very thing in their minds now. Dirge didn't have quite as much control over his men as he thought. I'm leaving the Barrow, but I need your help.
Okay, I like riddles and games. How?
We're gonna kill the Barrow King. A silence descended upon the room as the audacity of the idea wormed its way into every mind present. Even Dirge looked taken aback for a moment. But then, like a practiced actor getting into character, the thief smiled once more.
Good plan, with just one minor issue. You know the Barrow King is already dead, right?
Doesn't mean he cannot be killed, if the Grey Company will help. Several of the assembled men exchanged glances. It was clear to Gryph that while they still had their lives in the Barrow, they all knew that they were prisoners. For men like these, that had to be the worst torture. Dirge must have sensed the tide in the room and was desperate to return to the status quo.
It isn't so bad here. Our little corner of the Barrow is quite nice. It's easily defensible, has plenty of water, a farm, sure it's a fungus and root vegetable farm, but still fresh food. We even have our own tavern, courtesy of Runeveld over there.
Dirge indicated the burly, sausage-fingered man clutching Zeg. Runevald grinned at the praise. Zeg took that moment to kick the brute in his stomach, a motion that earned an annoyed glance from the large Ordonian. No offense to Runeveld and his fine fungus brew, but what I'm offering is a chance at life again. It won't be easy. Some of us may not survive, but at least we'll retain some control over our own lives. A pulse of anger surged through Dirge as the Egyptian sensed the tone of the room turn. He sidled up to Gryph, whispering in his ear,
What's your game, friend?
No game, Gryph whispered back, staring directly down into the thief's blue eyes. All I want is to get out. I have somewhere to be. Gryph leaned in close, lowering his voice. And I know what happened between you and Ovrim. I know the truth. Panic surged into Dirge's eyes, and Gryph knew that Dirge's grip on the Grey Company was tenuous. After a long moment where Gryph could feel Dirge's thoughts testing his mental defenses, Dirge finally grinned.
You know, maybe you are onto something.
He turned back to his fellows and opened his eyes wide.
What say you, fellas? Feel like getting out of here?
A lukewarm cheer rose among the men, and many of them gripped their weapons, ready for action.
I just have one condition, Dirge said, and it is non-negotiable.
Name it.
This one stays behind, locked up and left.
Dirge nudged Ovrim with a toe. A small grunt came from the Zaidai's mouth, and his eyes locked onto Gryph's.
He betrayed the code. None of us will fight alongside him.
Every man of the Grey Company nodded in agreement. Whatever this code was, it apparently held sway over these men. Gryph wished that Ovrim had told him the truth of his banishment, but if Dirge's moment of panic was any clue, then it was likely Dirge had been the one to betray this code. Gryph inhaled deeply and pretended to be deep in thought. After a moment, he turned to Dirge. "Fine by me," Gryph said in his most casual tone. Dirge smiled. Wick reacted a little worse.
You bastard! He got us down here, and you're just going to leave him to this psycho?
Dirge turned on the gnome.
You want to join him? The well has enough room for two if you don't move around too much.
Wick's eyes went wide in panic. "We need him," Gryph said. "I've seen the things he can do." Dirge thought for a moment, and then waved his hand idly.
Fine, but keep him under control, or my next sting will be for him.
Dirge nodded his head towards Ovrim, and one of the larger men hefted the fallen Zaidai onto his shoulder. Without another word, Dirge exited the room. Some of his men filed out after him. Others eyed Gryph and Wick warily, waiting for them to leave. Wick glared anger at Gryph before finally leaving.